pretty much just hand cannons. Simple iron tube, which is 15 minutes or so, I'll be talking to you about some of the weapons, I'm thinking firearms, that would have been used at the time of the battle. And the first piece that I have here is the standard military firelock of the 17th century. This is a 1690 pattern matchlock, and certainly it's typical of those firearms that would have been carried by both the King's armies. Well, when I say hand cannon or handguns, you can certainly see what I mean, because, as I say, are easy to use and they're solely dependent on this little burning match cord. Now, if you think about it, hey, this is Ireland. It rains. And if you're out in the rain, your match cord gets wet and wet rope just doesn't burn. So the soldier may as well not have his free headaches. Yeah, afterwards if you're lucky. Usually it's a tot of rum. Now they weigh 12.5 pounds and they do make pretty effective clubs. And I reckon that as much of the use that the matchlock got was as a club as a shooting implement. Now, the 17th century saw the development of other types of firearms also. And I'm sure you've all heard of the flintlock. The flintlock was developed in the 17th century. Simply a leather belt suspended from which we have little wooden bottles. And contained within the wooden bottles we have sufficient gunpowder for one shot. Soldiers didn't have to think about it. They knew they had exactly the right amount of gunpowder. And if any of you do any shotgunning, I'm sure you're familiar with the term 12 bore or a 12 gauge. It's the same size, 12 balls to the pound of lead. The last thing on the belt looks like a little salt shaker, but it's actually a fine powder dispenser. It's a little powder flask that contains finely ground powder that is pushed into the pan of the musket, and that's so that the fine powder will catch even the smallest of sparks or the dullest of embers. Simply a twist of paper, this time containing not just the gunpowder but also containing the bullet. This means when the soldier plucks it from his bag, he has everything in his hand that he needs to load to fire the weapon. Speeds up the rate of fire to 1 shot every 20. Now, there was also something else happened in the 17th century. The 17th century we saw a new soldier come onto the battlefield. This was a new type of a soldier. They were known as dragoons. Now, dragoons were mounted infantrymen. They would ride into action on horses. As we take the cartridge in the right hand and the musket in the left, the only thing now I have left to open it are my teeth. And this is where, to commit to loading his weapon, the soldier has to bite the bullet and get on with it. And I'm sure you've heard that expression as well, to bite the bullet. And this is another musketry expression. Now, before I bite the bullet, I do have a confession. These are blanks. There are no bullets in them. So you will have to bear with me and pretend that I'm going to bite.
At the Battle of the Boyne, there were no such things as thoroughbreds. They hadn't yet been invented, if you like. But we do have a little connection here to the thoroughbred, and that is that the very first of the 3 foundation sires, all thoroughbreds trace their ancestry back to one of 3 stallions. And the very first of those was the Byerley Turk. And the Byerley Turk was actually ridden here on this field on the day of the battle by Captain Robert Byerley. And after not only the battle of the British, to form the thoroughbred breed. But this is the kind of horse that existed before the thoroughbred. The Baroque horse is significantly different from our modern horses. He's got a different job to do, and he's compared to our modern horses. This horse is barely bigger than a pony. Now, horses are measured here, right in front of where the saddle is, and their shoulder blades. And this horse is 1.50 meter. This little horse here, you might have already also noticed that it's built a bit like a Volkswagen. The engine in a horse is in the back, and this one has a very big engine. Now that's considered a good thing in horses, not in people necessarily, but a good thing in horses. And so whilst this is not a very fast horse, it's a very, very powerful one. And don't forget that speed is no advantage in the 17th century, because any horse is going to be faster than a man running away. And that's the only speed we actually need on the battlefield, because the battlefield wasn't about speed. It's not like in the movies, not a lot of galloping and blowing trumpets. It's all about power. And power is what the horse gives you in a great abundance. So notice now that my steering has changed a little bit, and that I can now only use one hand on the reins in which to control this horse. And if you're going to fight cavalry battles the way that they were fought in the late 17th century, what you have to have is ultimate control, because all of that power and all of that height that you have, the advantage that you have over the people on the ground, is only going to be of use to you if you can control it. And this is where the third and most significant difference between the modern type of sports horse and the Baroque horse comes into play. And that is the fact that the Baroque horse is almost uniquely trainable. They have an extremely calm temperament or character, and they form a very deep bond with their rider, which means that we can use the horse on the battlefield, even with our one hand, in a unique sort of a way. In that if I need to come in here and cut your heads off, I can do that, or if I need to get away from you so that you can't cut my head off, I can do that as well. So that we have to have a horse that is very maneuverable on the field, to go forwards, to go backwards, to go sideways, and to turn on command in its own length. Now that takes a great deal of training to be able to do that without, as you might have seen in the movies, a lot of pulling and chucking on the reins and that sort of stuff. You need to have a horse that's extremely trainable and is extremely well trained, and this is the key and the clue to all cavalry in the late 17th century. Now, as you can imagine, all of that training takes a really, really long time. It would take about 5 years to produce a horse ready to go into battle, because the horse is not naturally very brave. He's particularly not very happy about loud noises and bangs and people trying to kill him, all of which are going to be happening on a battlefield. So again, you need a horse that's unique in the character, quite brave for a horse. Horses aren't nature's heroes anyway, but one that is ultimately the most trainable horse, and this is what we have here with the Baroque horse. Now, all Baroque horses have some Spanish or Andalusian in their ancestry, including this one, by the way. And the Spanish horse, if you think about it today, still with us today. The main job of the Spanish horse is bullfighting nowadays. The main job of the Spanish horse in the 17th century was warfare. It was the ultimate war horse. And the training of the war horse did not take place in Ireland. We don't have any tradition in this country of the great classical riding schools that we have on the continent, and that's where almost all of the cavalry horses that would have fought here at the Battle of the Boyne came from. Most of these horses were trained in Italy and in Spain. Some also trained in the great court schools of France, Denmark, Sweden, Holland, so forth. And there is still one great royal riding school left, which has been running since the 16th century, and you might have heard of it, and that's the Spanish Riding School in Vienna. And that's where the Lipizzano stallions are still trained today, and you may have heard of them, you may have seen pictures of them, and they're very famous for jumping through the air and kicking out, aren't they? That's the ultimate picture of a Lipizzana. And if you think about it, imagine what sort of effect that would have if a horse jumped through the air and kicked out if he was on the battlefield and he was faced into a group of infantry such as you are. Now that would have a great effect on anybody on their feet, and this is the way, of course, the horses were trained to get past people with bayonets and past people with pikes. Now and in modern money, that is about the same as buying 3 Ferrari sports cars. They were incredibly expensive. So it means that the only people that are just make the note that nobody's ever been killed by a melon, and fruit tends not to fight back. So we have to train the horse to do is to present you to your target as much as possible on your right hand side, my right hand side. That's because I have the advantage then of using my sword. I can use the sword off the left and in front and behind, but it is far better for me to use it on the right. So we don't need a lot of speed, but we do need accuracy. We need to come in here and we need to be able to do that. There were no fences.
How many horses were at the back?
How many horses at the battle? We don't know exactly. Conservative estimate was at least 10,000 cavalry. Probably an equal number, slightly less, of dragoon soldiers. Now, dragoons were mounted infantry soldiers, so they had different type of horses. They didn't ride their horses into battle, they didn't fight from horseback, so the horses were really just purely for transportation. And they would have been even smaller than this one, and little native Irish ponies and cobs. That's what they were used for. So probably throughout the entire battlefield, and try and take out the cavalry, because the cavalry were only really effective when they were right hand to hand. Then they would use pike, which were 16 to 18 feet long. That was just to keep the horses off and to try and kill the horses, of course. And of course, this is where the horses were trained to jump. They would jump on top of the pike. And after that, then you have bayonets and halberds and anything you could stick in them.
Well, I'm not selling my car.